Amazing, amazing, amazing. What an amazing morning, right? They say I must have my eyes a bit open. Yeah. Everyone have an amazing and amazing and amazing and amazing listening in on our relationship discussion of this month, right? Why should we have an amazing listening in? Because the world is echoing about the relationship fact of our generation. And when we think about the relationship fact of our generation, we allow ourselves to listen to the partnering, right? The family, the combination that has brought our generation together. And with saying that today, we have discussed the emotional fit and the birthness of relationship, right? And with the emotional fit, we have had the education that our emotional reaction is that requires us to nurture our relationships in general, that requires us to nurture that is family in general, that now not only to a generation has become the man woman of our generation, but has become that is the family of our generation. It is that we have said that the fruits of our relationship is that we nurture and that we birth out in season, that becomes family of the next family, right? And therefore our discussion today is we are focusing on that brings fruit, but that is going to be non-argumentative and non-aggressive to our generation. It is that what growing up, the different religions has required us to respond differently to our generation in general, right? Our different religions, our different household upbringings, our different traditional requirements required us to then find ourselves with that is going to be fine for humanity in general, being family on earth, humanity in general having to find that this is one house, and the house now speaks of a relationship that somewhat is different in our season. And therefore with saying that, we want to focus not only on nurturing our relationship, but the familyness of humanity that requires us to react on that is gonna be protective for our generation, and that is protective for us as human beings, right? The individuality, the individual protective season of our generation is what I focus about this year when it comes to relationship discussions. That our requirement to be protective with where we are at, our requirement to be protective with listening to what is required of us in our season, right? Our requirement to be protective with how do we allow ourselves to be fine with what we are educated concerning our generation in our season, and how do we allow ourselves to not be aggressive concerning that is different in our generation than how it used to be. It is that when we look upon some of about Ribea, Elise's photos, you say, yo, but sometimes the woman looks like the man. And that is what it is, and that is what we are going to discuss on Monday morning. It is that the woman has become more affirmed to the manism of the woman in a season because of a parenting requirement to parent a generation out of a season that they found themselves in question because of LGBTQ in relationships, because of lots of questionings that is relating to the birth mama, that is the woman that now has to parent in a season. It is that the mama has to realize that it is now not the mama that only gives birth to the baby, but that it is the baby that is now representing the mama fact in our generation. And therefore our parenting requirement is going to be that is going to be non-abusive to the other, that is going to be not misinterpreting what someone else is saying, what we are at, that Ribea Elise says what Ribea Elise say in a vote business, and that we therefore educate our generation through that is sometimes aggressive when we are finding ourselves in a situation that is unfamiliar, right? Last year we have spoken about familiarization. Last month, not last year, about family being that familiarization of where we are at. And when it comes to that protectiveness in our generation, it is important that we affirm ourselves to that. That is the family familiarization, that family requirement. That is that when Mama Ribea parents, then Mama Ribea reminds herself of the parenting right? What she's familiar with, that environment that has been my education when I grew up, right? When I was finding myself in my mama's education room was exactly that. That is a protective environment of familiarizing yourself of what is happening and therefore allowing yourself to be fine with where you are at. And it is that we, as a generation today, from the womb of our Mama Anna, that I, Ribea, Elise, today affirm myself to educate that is protective to someone else when they listen to our advice and our opinion on relationship challenges and relationship in general. In last month, yes, we have discussed our fruits, right? We have discussed the grape, the vine, the vineyard, and that process of relationship, the process that nurtures our relationships, the process that the fruit of the relationship that we are required to produce in our relationships, right? And when you realize that your relationship produces the fruits, it is like when I was in South Africa in 2020, then our generation season was so visible on our vineyard, right? In front of our house we have a vineyard, right? We have grapes growing there, and every season those grapes have produced the most amazing, the vines have produced the most amazing grapes, and the community people always come to knock on the door. Can we have some grapes? The children, kids, can we have some grapes from your vineyard? And it's amazing that in our season our generation is finding themselves in that they have to familiarize themselves with the atmosphere, right? Familiarizing yourself with that when we look at the different seasons and how it produces, we familiarize ourselves with that requirement of how even when you go to the vineyard, there's a voice that educates you. Some people find it interesting. Some people find that some people would say, but that sounds odd. But when you have educated yourself to listen to seasons and to listen to the sound and the education of the universe, of nature itself in our generation, then you would be like Ribea Elise. When she looks at the vineyard and she realizes there's a difference, then she has that there is that attentive the requirement within a season, right? Because it's like nature speaks to us in so many different ways, but finding yourself in that familiarization, and that is the education of a protective environment when nature educates and when we are being educated in our seasons. And therefore we allow ourselves to be familiar to that. That is education in our every season, and that is familiarization when we are being educated with what's required of us in our season and how we are required to affirm ourselves to that. That is going to be non-abusive to you, but then also non-abusive to someone else, right? Because if we educate ourselves out of abuse in relationships, we do not only think of ourselves, therefore, but we also allow ourselves to think of someone else. But when we affirm ourselves to that is the education of how would you protect self, you would feel fine to learn to protect someone else in a way that is also going to be non-abusive, to protect your relationship partner in a way that's also going to be non-abusive to them. And therefore, it is of utmost importance to learn how the fruits that the relationship should produce, how to nurture that, and how to nurture the one another in the relationship, right? How to protect one another in the relationship, but also how to nurture that humanity that mankind has been educated about all these years. Mankind has not been told that it's going to be easy. Mankind has not been educated that it's only going to be men and women in your generations. But when we look at television programs years ago, the education was there that our generation is gonna look like that, right? And it is not that someone else can say that they were not aware of the changes that might happen in a generation. It is, how do you still produce that fruit, and how do you still nurture, and how do we still parent in that there is a protective environment, even though the voice and the education in our generation might seem different at times. And that is of utmost importance, right? Familiarization. The vine that are tasted with eating your grapes, and the grapes that are tasted with appreciating the most flavoring wine. The vine and the branches, right? That when you taste the grapes, you would want to taste that there is every part of this grape, right? And when you taste the grapes, you appreciate sometimes the sweetness of it. Sometimes there's that sour grape, and when you taste it, it's really sour, but you appreciate it because it is a grape, right? And you have come to taste the sourness of it also. And that's sometimes your season in a relationship. It is the vine that sometimes look like it's just there, right? Someone said it yesterday on the computer, it's just there. The vine that sometimes look like it's just appearing and it's just there, and no one knows how the vine of that grape actually tastes, right? Because who would now want to go and taste a dry tree, right? Who would now want to go and taste a dry piece of wood, right? Because the vine reminds us of wood, exactly, right? And it reminds us of something that can become nothing, right? And then the vine to us, when we look at the vineyard itself, the vine to us looks like that looks like nothing that is ever part of the grape. But I remember how often my family members, yes, my time when it's a changing season, my brother Anton or my brother Martin or my brother Zach would come, and the brothers would be like, but the vine is still not nurtured, right? Who hasn't nurtured this year? Why is the vineyard looking like that? And it's not a big vineyard that is just in front of our yard. But it is that education that has become that you don't have to own a big farm in order to be educated to that, right? We receive the education at our very house, right? In every season, it was every brother's responsibility to nurture the vineyard and the vine that many of us sometimes didn't want to take note of, because I would now not take note of it, and my brothers would always be firm on that. That is that when the vine is not right, and when we do not nurture, and when someone do not do that season of nurturing, Ribea, and then the grapes is not gonna produce that fruit that we sometimes appreciate every once a year when families are there, right? And when it's a season, right? And then we would argue, and I would look at them and they would be really firm on that. And that is the nurturing of the vineyard, the nurturing of the grapes, the nurturing of the vine, the nurturing of when we look at the leaves of the vine, then we look at how it would produce in its season. Then we would stand and we would discuss it quite some time of how it's required to produce, how it produced it the year before, and how we should nurture it so that it can produce properly in our season. And that is the education that sometimes are so intertwined with humanity, with the familyness of a generation, that our family travels from afar, and the one thing that attracts us most is our little vineyard there, and the one thing that we have a discussion around, and that we would stand there for hours. And when we have a discussion in our houses, sometimes when we want to just discuss outside matters, we would sit outside the door and we would have that discussion that is producing fruit as a family, brothers and sisters, right? And we would sit in front of the door and we would have hours and hours of discussions. And that is just that nurturing, that familiarization, but that family that produces once again that they say we are protective to the other. That even though in relationships sometimes it might seem that the relationship are questioning, right, and that we question our relationships, right, and that we question where we find ourselves, in our relationships, and that our relationships are questioning us in general, right? Because sometimes it seems like your relationship is testing you as a person, and the questioning you as a person becomes that sometimes requires us to listen to how is it that we nurture that vine that sometimes it looks like it's questioning you. Sometimes your partner looks like they're questioning you, and you do not know if the relationship is meant for you to be at. And when you make time to discuss that, when you make time to get familiarized with how you sense concerning the relationship, then it is that once again creates a protective environment for the other, but that once again are that when you can even taste the vine in the grapes, that even though the grapes might seem sour, the grape might seem bitter sometimes, it might seem a little bit dry sometimes, but the appreciation of the tastiness of that is that when you taste the grapes in the wine, and then the wine can sometimes be bitter, and people would say, but I appreciate my bitter wine, and someone else would say, I would rather drink grape juice than having a glass of wine because of the bitter taste of it. But it is that education that the relationship is never going to be easy, but the requirement to nurture and to listen and to sense within yourself, how do you sense concerning where you are at in your relationship, right? It is that inner sense of how do you sound when you are challenged in your relationship. How does your partner sound when they are challenged with where they find themselves at? How do they appreciate that glass of bitter red wine that in my season I was drinking a glass of dry red wine, and in the next season when I was young and I used to go clubbing, and then I would some seasons drink a glass of very dry red wine, in the next season I would drink a glass of very sweet red wine, right? Of the how did they call it? I can't remember, but the very thin red wine, right? Chardonnay, no, yeah, that's I think, but yeah, probably a Chardonnay or white wine. But I would appreciate the softness sometimes in a season. I've enjoyed appreciating my wine, and I would sometimes appreciate the harshness of a glass of red wine. And then you can't even taste the harshness because you just want to sense that is the vine, and you can remind yourself when you drink a glass of red wine, it exactly tastes like a glass of vine. You can taste the dryness in it of the vine in a red wine when it's nurtured, when it's really nurtured through its season, right? And sometimes I would go through a season and I would say that I do not now drink any more dry red wine. Can I now have a glass of a glass of a lighter red wine, right? I'm gonna now give you the name of what the wine is that I also used to drink. That is a type of red wine, right? But it is that has a sweeter taste in it, and the next red wine would have the more drier red wine taste. And I remember how I used to appreciate every season of where I find myself at, right? Every season that I do not question myself where I'm at being young, but the education is that is how I appreciate the glass of red wine rather than being challenged in drinking something that I know is not for me. And if I know this season I do not want to have that dry red wine, then I would really go for the lighter red wine, right? For the sweeter red wine. And therefore, in our relationships, the same. When we really find ourselves that the relationship is now somewhat challenging, right? Or the relationship is now somewhat not nurturing those fruits, then it is that you educate yourself, that where you find yourself at, you make a way to tell yourself that what is going to be, to educate yourself, and that is going to be the protective environment for you, and finding what is it that is protective for you, that is protective for your partner, that is protective for your family in general. It is those situations that you don't constantly find yourself at. And I've been challenged in my relationship, and in our marriage we have been challenged, right? We are now going 18 years in marriage, right? And it's been challenging, and we just sometimes just want to just give up. But it is not that we are holding on to one another. It is that we are in a parenting household, right? And when we are in a parenting household, we find ourselves doing that is going to be fine for the environment of parenting that we are parenting Kiara at, and that we are not challenged at how we are parenting, and we are not challenging one another. But if we find that the environment is not fine for us, then I can realize that Dorian gives me space and I give him space. And that's just how it is in our relationship. We have had that all these years, so that we are very firm on giving one another that space in the house, right? This is the house, this is a relationship. But the protectivement of that is that you give one another space. If you're really in a relationship, that you really find yourself that there's that are sometimes challenging in the relationship, then it is that you sometimes learn to give one another space, because the parenting requirement is that protective environment for both partners and for the family in the relationship. And therefore, it is easy for parents to sometimes just want to rush off and just want to pull the child away and just want to have the child this way and that way and that way, like a wind. Yes, it was stormy last night. And it is easy for parents to just have a child in a stormy environment, that the wind blows to this way and then the wind blows to that way, and then the child should just be like going with the way of the parents, right? And I have been very firm about the fact that we are parenting, and this is where we are at in our season, and we're not going to be like a wind blowing this way and a wind blowing that way, and the child must now just be there and there, right? And Kiara is firm about that. She's very, very, very educated, and she's firm about that she's now really not gonna be like, in the oddness of the mother and father being odd in the relationship. She's just the daughter that is just gonna now not allow any oddness around her, and therefore it's very interesting. Our household is amazingly interesting. But the most interesting part is that we allow Kiara to be Kiara in a season, and that it's not about us, but about the protective requirement in the household that is important for us all in the household, and that is very amazing. But yeah, such is relationships in general. It produces the most amazing grapes, but the grapes are then being produced into a wine that can be sometimes tasty for one person and sometimes very bitter for the next person, right? And that is just that of the man and womanness in relationships. And then people found it challenging, and some people went on and went to go and find relationships, man and woman, and because there was lots of arguments in our generation about relationships. So it's not only that there was no man-woman challenges, but there was really arguments in our generation. Our generation really moved from that is now going to challenge the man-woman relationships, right? And they really allowed the parentingness of that to not be hindered by argumentativenesses, that some people really have decided that then for them man and woman is then fine, rather than challenging the fruit that is the birthness of the man womanness of the relationship. And therefore some people really stepped away with that they honor the relationship in such a way, that they appreciate the relationships in such a way, that they stepped away from the argumentativeness that are happening between man and woman in our season. And that is really, 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 we really appreciate people who really made a firm standpoint and saying that they are also not going to aggress the birthness of relationships, because everyone appreciates being born and humanity appreciates the completeness of it. But it is that we have to constantly educate ourselves, our generation being one family. And our generation being one family means that some people has made different choices, and therefore they refine themselves in different types of relationships. But the parenting of it is that we were all born from the womb of our mamas, and we are therefore all required to parent with that is going to be fine and protective for everyone. I always say that our mamas are every one of us. Some people in the films educate that also. Our mamas are every one of us. The men are the mamas, and the papas and the women are the mamas, right? And because within the man is the mama, and the outside appearance is that is what you call the seed, right? But the seed is that the Bible educates us that when you look around yourself and you look at the trees growing and you look at the vineyards and you look at the nurturing of it, then you realize that the inner man is his mama, and the outer body, the Bible says, is the nurturingnesses of the man. There is a presence from the outernesses, but the innerness is born from his mama's innernesses and everything of his mama. And the seed of that is the protective environment for us. When you see a tree and it's very hot and sunny, and then you go and stand under the tree, and then you can sense that is the shade in it, the protectiveness, the seed of the relationship. So the seed is not only the mama giving birth, but the seed is the man that nurtures, right? That nurtures the earth, that nurtures the universe also. From the womb of his mama, from the innerness and inner veins and inner everything of his mama, and from the seed of his papa, it produces the man-woman birth fact. And that is the fruit of our relationships, and how we nurture and educate, and how we represent when we see our children looking different, and when we notice our children reacting different, is that I'm a mama and I said I'm not going to allow my Kiara to now not go and marry a man. But honestly, the world is so crazy that the children find themselves in different lifestyle choices. And my Kiara is firm, and my mama is educating me in totally different ways. She's not saying it and then she's saying it, right? So I'm not very harsh on her, and I allow her to experience everything in the amazingness of it, right? And I am not intervening with the process of it, only because as a family we grew up what listening to with my grandmama's upbringing. My mama Anna that then was very young and that also had that independent mindset. And now Kiara is that same, that if she had the opportunity, she would have probably already moved out and already be independently, right, being where she's required to be at. So she's the exact same granddaughter of Mama Anna and great-granddaughter of Mama Martha, right? And therefore she's got that same way of that she's very independent with where she's required to be at. She's very firm with the education in the universe, and she's really not negotiating someone else to now come and shove her with where they want her to be. She's very firm on where she's required to be at. And that is probably the birth of, what do they say, the third generation of it, right? From Mama Martha, Grandmama Martha, to Kiara, to Mama Anna, to baby Kiara, the third, fourth generation of a right, that is now in that is now going to be really in that environment that they are really familiar of where they find themselves at in this season. And that is the fruit of your relationship, the birthness of a baby that grows up and say that I'm now not a baby anymore. But then the parenting right is that is when the parent realize that the child might find themselves in that are challenging, then the parent provides that is a protective environment in general. And therefore, when the amazing vine that are tasted with eating the grapes, and the grapes that are tasted with appreciating the most flavoring wine are producing the birthness of the baby, and then the baby are exactly nurtured in that the baby does not question themselves, because the baby then learns that my babiness is baby Kiara, Hannah says Kiara, and I'm therefore born from the womb of Mama Anna that were familiar and the requirements of a season, and therefore baby Kiara would respond to that she finds herself in a protective and fine environment in what's required of her in a season. And therefore it is good that parents sometimes want to control the situation around their children, but it is also good that parents, and that in relationships and in marriages we get familiar with how do you sense what is the education concerning your relationship, and therefore you produces that there is a protective environment that blossoms in season, and that brightens in a season, that prepares for the next season, and that allows another season its opportunities to once again prepare for either the hotness of a summer, or either the blossomness of a spring season, or either the winterness of a winter, or either the most amazing autumnnesses of an autumn season, right? The colors of our autumnnesses. I love the autumn colors, the different autumn colors. I love it in season. And I love when women educate with, I love my Evoke businesses also that educates with the different colors in a season, right? And sometimes color to people looks bland, right? And I remember how I used to question the pages when how I used to question H&M, right? And I used to question the type of clothing that they would educate on in season. And I came on and I said, no, but they need some color. And I learned that some seasons you need that color, but sometimes when autumn comes forth, then there's still that there is the blossoming color. And sometimes we don't realize it, right? Because we are so focused on the autumn season that then you see every year and there's that blossom, the amazing yellow blossom, right? And I remember having to learn that the education of our generation is not what Ribea, Elise is not familiarized with, because when I grew up at New Orleansville Primary School, yes, I was excited to learn that the amazing colors in the spring season is that attitudes of our young children, right? Our attitudes that are gonna be that someone else is excited to be your friend at school because they have learned that you are now not in your winter season, but you are in that season. That is that protectiveness that someone else feels welcome, and that is that nurturing of how humanity listens to the education in seasons. I really appreciate my seasons a lot, yes, and I appreciate the education that the universe has nurtured and parented me at when I grew up in primary school, and that I do not miss a season about it, and I do not miss the education of the sound in a season about it. And I've been very firm on that, and I'm educating that in our Evoke business. But what Evoke business also represents is the nurturing of the relationship, right? Is those seasons that are gonna be sometimes different. The winter season that's sometimes coming with a blow and someone else's, but it feels snowy, right? The autumn season that has got its amazing autumn leaves, but there's somewhere some blossoming kiss, right? The spring season that reminds us of that attitude that is really just that someone else feels welcomes at, and they are appreciating the other person, the familiarization that is then that familyness of our generation, right? The familyness that when we go to a beach on a summer day, right, when it's hot and when the sun comes through, then we find that there is family with the seaness, with the waterness, with the warmness in water, right? That amazingness of our generation that brings us into family in this universe, and that allows us to remind ourselves to remain to produce the fruit that is fine, that is protective, that is appreciative, that is welcoming, and that is the most tasty grapes that you have ever tasted, right? And even if the wine is bitter, we educate ourselves to create that environment that is going to be welcoming, that is going to be protective to someone else. Yeah, so producing fruits in a relationship is not easy. I now want to discuss a general relationship issues in our generation. Another thing that our generation constantly find themselves challenged at is that there's a lot of relationship issues nowadays, and I'm firm to say the intermarriages, right, of black women relationships. I'm firm to educate on that. And that is the interracial amazing YouTube relationships and marriages. I'm firm to educate that after the interracial marriages, the war in Africa went chaotic, and now Sudan is even questioning and even being questioned by it, right? I'm firm to say that a lot of people intermarried, and when you talk to them, they constantly remind you that they have been married before, their wife died of cancer, and they are now single, right? That's a lot of guys on social media that are really responding with that. And a lot of people that has really gone through that. And then we question ourselves when we look at our generation at war, and we learn that it can be because of relationships that they are arguing, right? And then we question if you want to move out into a new relationship, you would listen to what is the environment around you. For people finding themselves in those relationships that are now the marriages that have intermarried, and that people are receiving an amount of money to go and marry a Ribea, Elise, and then with the amount of money, there's businesses that really allows them to be employed, and there's businesses that fund them, because according to the world order, that type of person are only allowed to live until that year and that year and that year. And so as intermarriages become a business to some people have paid people sums of money to go and intermarry into countries and to go and then have a child. and to go and then get rid of the wife, right? And there's all of these environments that has happened around our generation, and I really am watching a lot of these intermarriage films. Yes, it's amazing, the films of the interracial marriages and how the sum of money and the amount of money is there. The jobs have been made available for everyone, and everyone knew exactly. Someone was sending me a message that it's now not the first message that his wife died of cancer and he's got a child. And then I'm like, okay, so y'all are saying that to say that we can't, y'all women can't say that they didn't tell them that in some of the relationship discussions and the relationship messages, right, that people send back and forth to the other. But what they can now say is that they were firm with the honesty of what happened in previous relationships. And it's for everyone to really learn to really find themselves fine within their marriages, and to really listen to the environment itself, to find out, was your marriage partner part of this group? Are they working for a syndicate group of people that really has got to do with really getting rid of certain women? And or are your relationships now really a marriage? And is it really that the person are really that you and the person really met in a way that is really honest, right? And in a way that is non-abusive to humanity in general and to the other next human being in general. But other than that, yes, there's a lot of things happening in our generation, and we're gonna have to be very attentive to it. It's amazing, but we're gonna have to be attentive to it. And if your partner has been part of that group of guys that were paid this amount of money for a certain reason, and you might find yourself ill with cancer or things happened after your marriage, then it is time for you to decide what is going to be protected for you. And if your partner has mentioned it to you before you met him that he has lost his previous wife or things like that, and then you exactly also know that it might be part of that group, right? Other than that, be very attentive to our relationships, and women, be very, very attentive to our environments around us when we meet people, right? So that we are not finding ourselves in abuse, and so that the world doesn't have to bomb one another up because of this argument now that relates to the intermarriages and to interracial marriages. That seems like it was an abusive program that someone was busy with in our generation. Other than that, that is it for our relationship discussion of today. Have that is protective for you, and don't abuse yourself, don't abuse your partner, and have that is gonna be fine and firm with producing the fruit of birthness within any relationship. Have an amazing day further.